It's thought to be the happiest place in the world, but have you ever thought about life behind the scenes at Disneyland? Sure, you might be able to run around taking photos and enjoying the scenes at the park, but sometimes it's a whole different story for the employees. It's true, they get a lot of perks, and the job itself seems incredible, but there are a lot of things you never hear unless you actually work at the park. Today we put together a list of 10 secrets that you've never heard about Disneyland. Disneyland is great, and we've lost count as to how many hours we've spent watching the classic films, but we all get bored of them eventually. So before we start, make sure to click the subscribe button so you can watch the Hub's great videos instead. The Sunken Kingdom. If you visited Disney's Animal Kingdom, you might have wondered why it's so warm in there. Sure, you found the animals exciting to look at, and then the park itself was pretty cool too, but you probably always had that overarching feeling of being ever so slightly too warm. You could have sworn it wasn't this hot throughout the rest of the park. Don't worry, you're not imagining things. Unlike the other parks, the Animal Kingdom is shaped ever so slightly like a bowl and sinks into the ground. The reason for this is to keep the animals happy and in a temperature more natural for them. Even though it can get warm throughout the entirety of Disney World, it's important for the Animal Kingdom to be slightly hotter at all times to ensure the animals stay healthy. This is helped by the vast amount of foliage dotted around, which are also placed to add realism to the park. This all comes together to help Disney keep the park as realistic as possible while looking out for the animals as well as the guests. You might have to take off your sweater once you're inside, but you'll definitely think it's worth it once you've had a full wander around this magical kingdom. Have a Disney day. When you think of the word Disney, it probably conjures up feelings of excitement, joy, and laughter. It's one of the happiest places in the world, right? Well, that might be what first springs to mind when you think of the Disney World, but it's a whole other story for those who work there. You might have heard the phrase, have a Disney day, when wandering around the different parks. You're probably racking your brains right now trying to remember if you've been told something similar, but we're hoping for your sake that you haven't, because to be told to have a Disney day is nothing complimentary, and in fact, it's something of an insult. No one is sure of an exact translation, but the general thought is that you'll be told the phrase if you've annoyed a staff member. We like to think it's impossible to annoy Disney staff. How could you ever get frustrated or angry working in such a magical environment? We're guessing perhaps it's meant for the families who don't clear their rubbish away, or maybe the ones who don't say please or thank you. Maybe it's especially reserved for those who want to take just one too many photos with Mickey and friends when there's a line waiting. Unfortunately, we'll probably never know for sure. No breaking character. From the moment they put on their costume in the morning until the end of the day when they can get changed to go home again, Disney staff must remain in character the whole time. This might be standard in your typical 9-to-5 job, but is slightly more difficult when you're dressed up to represent a child's beloved television character. Sure, if you're dressed up as Snow White for the day, it might not seem like much more than wandering around talking to children and animals, but it gets a bit more difficult when Snow White falls ill. We've all become sick at work once or twice, and usually we're lucky enough to be sent home. Your colleagues might give you a sympathetic look, or maybe something sugary to help you along the way. But sadly, this isn't the case at Disney World. We assume that 6 staff members are allowed to go home, but they must continue to remain in character until they're safely away from the park and won't be spotted by any eagle-eyed children. This means that even if you're about to keel over with pain like this guy, you have to remain upright and smiling until you're out of view. The V word. Although it seems that Disney employees have one of the best jobs around, we often forget the downsides, one of which you might not be aware of, but you should listen out for the next time you're in the parks. If someone becomes ill in Disney World, staff members aren't allowed to use the word vomit. The reason for this is because they don't want to put off customers who are wandering around, especially if they're enjoying their lunch. Instead, staff members who have to report a child or adult being sick have to refer to it as the V word. This might sound a bit sketchy if you're listening into a conversation between 2 staff members and they mention it, but just remember that they're doing it for your sake. Realistically, if it's happened right in front of you, then no secret key phrase is going to hide the evidence. But it's a nice idea in theory, we guess. Disney staff also aren't allowed to show any kind of negative reaction if someone does fall ill, which means no crying out if an unwell kid accidentally throws up on them. Now, if that doesn't make you think twice about applying for a job at the Magical Kingdom, we're not sure what will. Princess requirements. If you think you can get over the occasional ill child at the park, and you'd still like to work there, you should learn about what it takes to become a Disney princess. This job role is definitely more than a simple resume and cover letter. For a start, Disney princesses must look a certain way. They can only wear up to a US size 10 because that's as large as the costumes run. Aside from this, they can't be too short or too tall, and must be within 5 feet and 4 inches and 5 feet and 7 inches. This is to preserve the authenticity of the character. If you fit the physical characteristics, you must then undergo a grueling audition process. princess. First, you'll learn a simple dance, and then you can read a script, do some improvisation, and finally, an interview. We didn't say it would be easy to become a princess. The successful princess then spends around 5 days analyzing the film she's featured in order to perfect things like voice inflections and common phrases. Finally, they will be given selected makeup and shown how to apply it. In order for all the princesses to look similar around the park, combined with the pressure of having to smile all day every day, we've definitely got a newfound respect for Disney princesses now. Lost children. Customers are called guests, staff members are called characters, and it's all part of keeping the magic together for the children. But you'll never hear them referred to as children, and definitely not if one ever gets lost. The kingdom is huge. There are different parks and thousands of people running around them. In the busy periods of the year, you could easily lose someone for a whole day or even more. So it's not surprising to hear that Disney has special protocols for when a child goes missing. But it's not necessarily to announce it how you'd expect. While the parents might be rushing around shrieking because they've lost their dear child, the staff members have a different approach. Instead of paging different staff members and telling them of a lost child, they will always refer to the kid as a lost adult. The reason for this is to stop any potential kidnapping. If someone overheard and wanted to take the child, they could easily scan around for a child on their own, and nobody would want that. The lost adult phrase is thought to reduce the likelihood of this happening, although we like to think the child would then chastise the lost adult for running off without them. The secret tunnels. When wandering around Disney World parks, you might start to get a bit of an ache in your legs. If you got a keen eye for your surroundings, you might even notice that the parks are sometimes built on a small slope. For example, when you first walk through the front gates, you're 1 story up, even though it seems like you're just standing on the ground level flooring. By the time you're further inside the magical kingdom and you've reached the Cinderella castle, you're actually 3 stories up from the ground. The reason for this isn't anything too exciting, but more to make the essence of the park appear more realistic and easier for the staff to get around too. When the park was first created, Walt Disney thought it looked a bit weird to have characters wandering around in the wrong areas. So before the park was expanded, he made the decision to build the rest of it on top of a series of tunnels, so staff could walk underground. This way, they could move around faster, and they would get a slight break where they didn't have to play their character. Not that we've ever been down there, but we imagine it would be a great place for a game of hide and seek. The Pirates of the Caribbean ride origins. Did you know that this ride was originally supposed to be a museum? Focusing on pirates, it was initially built to house different waxworks throughout history, before the design for the ride came along. At one point, the team behind the ride considered adding in a huge dinner theater, and decided that the food, rather than the pirates, would be the part that kept bringing customers back again and again. It was also one of the few rides that Walt Disney himself helped to design. He especially loved the boating element of the ride, and said it sounded like something out of a cocktail party. Unfortunately, Walt passed away before the ride was completed, so he never actually got to ride the final thing. However, he did give his approval for what he saw, and he was especially fond of the fake fire. The biggest secret behind this ride was the design work that went into it. We all know that Pirates of the Caribbean is supposed to be scary and treasure themed, but did you know that apparently there's a real human skull hidden inside? Admittedly, the manager of the park has never confirmed this, but a staff member claimed it was true. Now, we're definitely curious as to whether or not we could spot it during the ride. No selfies, please. Whereas some people like to boast about their jobs or to simply show the world what they're up to during working hours, Disney staff are most definitely not allowed to do the same on social media. It all goes back to the company's goal of making the whole experience as authentic as a cartoon world possibly can be. So any character who shares their experience will most definitely get into trouble. So this means no tweets, no Facebook posts, and definitely no selfies behind the scenes. In fact, nothing that goes on behind closed doors is allowed outside the premises, and rumor has it that any staff member who breaks these rules will be fired straight away. We imagine this was pretty straightforward back in the day when camera phones were a distant dream and social media was reserved for corporations and celebrities, but it's a completely different story now. Phones aren't technically allowed out during working hours, which you'll probably agree sounds standard for work, but it also makes it difficult if you bump into a favorite celebrity backstage. Most people would jump on the chance to get a photo with a well-known singer or dancer, but Disney employees can't risk this and have to make do with the memories instead. Two-fingered point. When you were a kid, your parents probably told you off for pointing once or twice. We know it's rude, which is why nowadays, if we want to show someone something in the distance, we usually describe it to them or give a small nod of the head. At Disneyland, they follow a similar routine, with a strange twist. Instead of pointing with one finger, they point with two. The effect is a bit unusual, and you've probably noticed it before, but just considered it a bizarre coincidence that all staff members point the same way. In fact, the two-fingered point is part of their training. Some say it's an homage to Walt Disney, who used to smoke a lot of cigarettes and pointed with two fingers while he smoked. Unsurprisingly, Disney didn't want to draw attention to this trait, so they told all staff members it was out of politeness. We're not exactly sure whether it's entirely one reason or the other, but we're sure we can all agree that it's far more polite to point with two fingers rather than one. You most likely won't see the two-fingered point anywhere else outside the park, which makes it a fairly unique trait to the Disney brand. You might think you're too old to visit the Disney parks now, but we'd have to disagree with you there. If nothing else, you've got an excuse to go back now to look out for all of these revealed secrets. We hope you enjoyed this video, and make sure to subscribe to the Hub before you go. Thanks, and see you next time!